One of the things that we were always warning about when, we were going through the whole leave scenario was in 2016 and of course beyond since then was constantly warning that your workers' rights will be eroded, that they are after your workers' rights. This was one of the great claims the Brexiteers really wanted to do, but didn't talk about. Because they would always say, oh, look, after Brexit, don't worry, you won't lose workers' rights. Oh, no, your workers' rights are only going to improve. They're only going to get better. Soon, the UK workers will be the best paid and best looked after workers in the world. But remember, there was a time, of course, where James Cleverly was in charge of business back in the Theresa May days. And one of the big things that he wanted to do, or at least was mooting about changing, was the Working Time Directive. This was a EU directive, which is now UK law, thankfully, still, was that you cannot, your boss or your organization cannot force you to work more than a certain number of hours. And this was a time was framed that this would give workers new freedoms. But the reality would have been far, far different. What this would have meant that, well, yeah, you were meant to do an 8-hour shift today, but actually we'd like you to work 11 hours today, if that's all right. Oh, and by the way, if you refuse, we'll sack you. That's how it would have worked. That's how it would have gone down. And there was a great outcry against it. And as a result, so far, the Working Time Directive has stayed in place, despite the fact that since then, the Conservatives have, from time to time, mooted the fact that they would like to get rid of it. And of course, Labour's response was, well, if you get rid of that, that's an instant pledge in our our next general election campaign that will bring that back. But there were many, many other provisions around workers' rights, which were unfortunately definitely very risky. And basically, the government just gone. Just as we've seen them rewrite chemical provisions today, turns out now that holiday pay for part-time and shift workers up in smoke, gone. It is one of the biggest single erosions of worker rights in the UK. And yet, remember, workers' rights meant to be better, meant to be improving. So we're going to have a look today to see what has happened here and what other people are saying about it. Because so far, it hasn't got a lot of news. Like I say, because it's come out today, there's plenty of other stuff to talk about Rishi Sunak. Of course, this will be coming out the day after. But I wouldn't be surprised if still not a lot of people are talking about it. And of course, if there is chaos being caused because, Rishi Sunak lost, you can understand why this news story might get buried a bit. So I thought I would talk about this because I think this is kind of important to talk about. So before we carry on, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there's a link to my Patreon page. There's the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then, shall we? And talk about this, because I think this is kind of important, the fact that these workers have just suddenly lost this right. And many may not even realize that they've lost this. So this comes from The Guardian, with part-time and shift workers to lose up to £248 million worth of holiday pay in UK rule change. Ministers are cutting holiday allocations and pay for irregular and part-time workers at a cost to staff of up to £248 million a year. The government is changing how holiday days and pay are calculated for people who do not work full time through the year, such as shift workers, school employees, and those on 0-hour contracts. Bear in mind, this is a government that has said ever since it came in back in 2015, we're going to get rid of 0-hour contracts. We're going to get rid of 0-hour contracts. Silence. Nothing. This will mean instead of receiving full holiday rights at the beginning of the year, in the same way as a full-time worker, 5 million British workers, and this is the insane part, 5 million British workers on temporary or irregular contracts will have to gradually gain them during the year. So you get no guaranteed holiday. That means at the start of a new working year, you cannot plan your holidays. If you work part-time or, again, 0-hour contract, you can't plan your holiday because you have to work to be able to earn your holiday. Whereas if you were a full-time worker, that holiday is already guaranteed. I think that's wrong. I think that is absolutely wrong for them to change these rules. And I hope Labour do really start talking about this. So experts have said that this is one of the most significant erosions of employment protection since the UK left the EU Working Time Directive. A government spokesperson said that we are reforming legislation to make overtime and holiday pay entitlement legislation less complex and easier for employers to follow. Yes, we're just making it less complex by taking away a right that workers have enjoyed for a long number of years. Justin Matters, the shadow Minister for Employment, said this government has rebuffed Labour's efforts to protect paid holidays. They've well and truly shattered their manifesto promise to level up the rights for workers, and Labour's New Deal has a plan to make work pay, ensuring that a high-growth, high-wage economy underpinned by job security has strong rights at work. And this is something else that we do not talk about, and I want to talk more about it, but we will probably later down the road. Labour's New Deal for workers. This is a massive package for protecting workers' rights, gets rid of 0-hour contracts, does a ton of stuff, even expands union protections and expands union powers at works. It is a really, really good policy that Labour should talk a lot more about. And Angela Rayner really has been the driving force behind that. And certainly at the general election, I really do hope that they just let her off the chain and really start hammering home this New Deal for workers, because it will be really, really good. So, and this is the unfortunate part, Labour officials could not guarantee, however, that they would overturn the change if they won the next election. The change follows a protracted legal battle between Lindsay Brazil, a music teacher on a 0-hour contract, and a school trust that employed her, over whether she could get the same amount of holiday pay as her colleagues on full-time contracts. And the Supreme Court ruled last year that she should, promoting conciliation amongst organizations that employ people on 0-hour contracts. And of course, in response, ministers in the business department said that they would issue new rules to overturn the court's ruling and ensure that companies can issue holiday days on a pro rata basis after all. According to the government's estimates, over 5 million employees are covered by these rules. Many in education and, of course, often are employed on zero-term contracts, and in retail, where people often work shift patterns on 0-hour contracts. The government analysis published last week reveals that the change would also be very wide-ranging. It said that it would save employees between 50 and 248 million pounds a year. Officials have said, however, the estimates of the number of people who will lose out that are uncertain, as it is unclear how many employees were actually abiding by the rules set out by the Supreme Court. It is very difficult to know exactly how many employers were following the previous case law, so it figures that they are involved and a speculatively, probably likely, significant overestimate, a spokesperson said. Officials said that they were able to issue the new rules in partly because Britain has left the EU and with its strict labour laws covered by the Working Time Directive. Richard Arthur, the head of the trade union at Thomson Solicitors, said this move takes advantage of what the government is allowed to do post-Brexit, and the government is taking that opportunity and bringing in new rules to the advantage of employers. And unfortunately, that's what was always going to happen. That the government was intended to do that. That was their plan from the beginning. Like I say, remember, we are still technically covered by the Working Time Directive. We are still in that framework. You are still protected by those rules. You will remember, of course, just late last year where we had the big rules clash about where Kimi Badnock wanted to get rid of all these rules and sort of, go and slash and burn them. And Labour was like, no, we want to protect especially the Working Time Directive. We want to protect the workers' rights rules. We want to make sure that those remain. So far, those have remained. But the worry always was that they would just start shaving them off one by one, ever so slowly, ever so surely. And now that this, unfortunately, is gone, this is a massive erosion of workers' rights. And as I do like to say from time to time, although I don't tend to cover workers' rights too much, I really need to cover them more, to be honest. I think the Empower should really be predominantly be with the employee, not the employer. Obviously, there are times where the employee, where the employer should have certain powers, over the employee, if they're not doing work, etc. The employer should be able to fire them. But when it comes to sort of, workers' rights, what you have, we like the protections you have in a workplace, that should be predominantly and always be very, very strong to protect the employee from being, abused by the employer. Because as we have seen countless times throughout the years, any time that an employee can take advantage of a worker, they will and will do time and time and time again. That has been the case throughout, history. But this is something we've got to watch out for. And if the Tories have less than a year less now to potentially a general election, what other worker protections are they going to get rid of? I'm sort of disappointed that, Labour aren't going to bring that back in. I think that's a bit of a disappointment. But the Labour New Deal for workers is really good and does improve and up workers' rights. So I am quite happy that is coming in. Bit disappointed, but as I've said before, sometimes in politics, you don't get everything you want. But I would rather get the new Labour deal for workers rather than get nothing at all on the Conservatives and probably strip away even more rights. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and our today's link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, etc., etc. There's a pony club down below, as always. And of course, we'll see you all next time.